everybody. I hope you can hear me, and I'm very happy to be here. Thanks for showing up, all of you, and hello, everybody out there on the internet who will watch this video later. The topic is open washing, and the fact that you are here makes me assume that I don't need to explain what open washing is. Should I? Yes, please. Yes, please. Okay. So from 2 years ago, I noticed that there is a trend coming up in proprietary software vendors that wanted to use the term open source as a quality, you know, label for their software, despite the fact not publishing their software or not following the rules or the characteristics of open source that we all know. We know how to publish, we know the licenses and stuff. Just a short example, company that was doing a digital twin asked me, so I'm Markus, I'm a senior journalist. I was journalist at Linux-Magazine and Heise here in Germany, tech magazines. I have a small company from Regensburg where I do open source consulting, and I'm working for Gromunio, which is doing an open source exchange replacement company startup from Vienna. And with my own company in Regensburg, I was asked by a company who is doing digital twins whether I could help them to win open source tenders for the state, which have been very common. It's very common to request open source in tenders for public offers. And they said, we always lose the tenders because we're not open source. So we don't want to publish our IP. We will never publish our source code because it's so valuable. And so we will never publish, we will never share, but we need the label open source so that we win the tenders. Because our competitors who do open source, they win the tenders and we fail. And I suggested them to do a workshop of about 3 days on the basics of open source, and that was the end of the business relation. They never came back. And that was the first time I had this encounter with open washing. And since then, many things have happened that we will also talk about in the course of this panel. And did that explain? There's a lot of companies out there who also from the old and good old open source world who have retreated a little bit from the values that we actually share. And that leads me directly to my first guest, which is sitting right next to me. I just want to say shortly who is here. So this is Cornelius. You all know Cornelius. I think he's doing KDE longer than the KDE exists or something like that. He's I've known him for many decades. It's so, wow. Okay, that's also, well, Cornelius from KDE. We have Holger Dürhoff from OwnCloud. I guess many of you also know him and you know OwnCloud. Yeah, we also know each other for decades. And the same applies to Richard Heigl, who is from BlueSpice, MediaWiki, Enterprise MediaWiki software from Regensburg, like an Atlassian replacement in open source, based on MediaWiki, also completely open source. And I'm very happy to have Leonard Kugler here from the CENDIS, the Center for Digital Sovereignty, which is an institution of the, how do you say in English, the State Secretary, the Ministry of Interior Affairs, the Bundesinnenministerium. Sorry. And that CENDIS, the Center for Digital Sovereignty, is running a few really, really cool open source things. And they are so cool that they've been invited to the United Nations only weeks ago, that they have invitations and guests from Japan, even from Taiwan and from other European countries. Collaboration with France, big things. And one of the things they do is open source desktop for the public administration called OpenDesk. You can read about it on Golem. Guess who wrote the article that did the testing? And what Mr. Kugler is standing for, he's the director, I guess, for Open Code, which is an open source repository for the public sector with more than 6,000 users, more than 5,000, more than 600 projects. And so we have the public sector. We have two leaders of small and medium enterprises, and we have the Wikipedia community. We have the cloud community, and I'm sure Holger also knows quite some stuff about AI. And we have Cornelius from KDE, with whom I would like to start. And then I will be silent and just asking questions, which you will appreciate, because those are the guys that know shit. I'm only the one who asks and who brings the bad news or the messages. So when we were preparing for this panel, I had a video conference with Cornelius this week, and not to my great surprise, but it was it was striking that Cornelius said that the openwashing is the biggest threat currently to our open source values. Did I quote you right? And that you're pretty scared of what's going on. Can you elaborate why that is such a big fear in you?
Sure. One thing you said, I'm in KDE for decades. It's pretty much exactly 25 years now since I'm doing KDE. I'm not the first or oldest contributor. There are people who are around for even longer time. And the reason why I'm here is, and still here, is that we are doing free software. I wouldn't be here if this would be just a job. And this doing free software, I think that's a core. I mean, that's why all you are here as well. And free software for me has these two parts. The software, that's technology, writing great applications and so on. We want to use that. We all want to have fancy stuff on our computers. That's all fine and nice and it's enjoyable. But we are also here because it's free. There are values behind that. Sometimes you call that open source. For pragmatic reasons, it's probably more or less equivalent. But there really stand the freedoms behind that, which are formulated in the 4 freedoms or in the open source definition, which is also reflected in KDE's vision, this giving people control about their digital life. So there are really strong values behind that. And the software part, I think, is something, I mean, I won't deny that other organizations, also companies which have no interest in freedom, are able to create usable and useful software, which people love to use. But what they don't do is this freedom part, which enables us to work together as a community, but also which gives users these freedoms. And that's the very important part, that users get the freedoms as well, not only the developing people. And with openwashing, what we see is that many companies see that there is advantages in using the term. You can use it for marketing, and they try to take this term for their own purposes without actually being open. And in the end, what is happening? I mean, they are taking away our language. So we can't clearly communicate anymore about our values because other people do it in a different way, mean different things, and people get used to open as something different. And I think that's really a threat to us, because we are not able to communicate our values clearly anymore. People don't understand that anymore. Users don't understand anymore what open actually means, that this open thing they get from a proprietary company, which takes away all their freedoms and concerns their privacy and all that this is not really open. So I think for us, it's very important that we have clarity about the terms so we can communicate, and we should fight for this. And when I say we, I mean us as KDE, as a free software community, all other free software communities as well. I think they also need to do that, and also the companies who are generally doing free software, who are generally doing open source. I think they are sitting in the same boat, and also all the companies who are using open source and want to have clarity about how this works and what they get. So that's why I think it's really a threat we have to fight.
I think it's very common also in the cloud, in the world of clouds, isn't it, Holger? I've heard the term open source as a service that is, for example, companies that use open source, produce open source code, license it with open source code, but they don't hand over the source code to their customers. They're just developing stuff in order to run it on their cloud, on their SaaS system, and the customers will never get it. And since you are from the cloud, well, maybe you also can refer to the world of AI, because I know you're also deeply involved in that. And that's the same thing. There is a lot of products and solutions out there that claim to be open source, but are they?
Yeah, exactly. We do see this a lot in the cloud with offerings. We also see changes to other licenses from open source licenses, which continue to be named open, which is a challenge because in fact they aren't. And if we look at the world of AI, everybody thinks that Meta and the models they do with Llama 3, etc. While they're great models, they are often termed as open. They are termed as open in all the press releases from them, etc. But they have a very important restriction. You can't do more than 700 million users with them, which in the world of open source communities is very difficult, because how do you measure? How do you count how many people you have there? And it's just not open source. So there is an ongoing trend. You mentioned, Cornelius, the open source definitions. So in the world of AI, there is currently a definition ongoing from OSI with having strict rules, what is open source and what isn't. And some of my hope is when that is finalized, that we get way more clarity and a back push to the open washing attempts we currently see. And it was mentioned in the talk before here, from an open source perspective, from a true open source AI system perspective, which involves all the weights and the training data and how you actually get to the model, so we can understand how they got there. And if absolutely needed, of course, with some money for training, we could redo the same work, but at least we can understand and have the necessary transparency. So right now, only the Olmo model really delivers those type of criteria. The challenge with that is it's not as good as the other models are at this time. So more effort needs to go into making more true open source models and making them better. And in any case, we should be honest, the companies should be honest, and we shouldn't be tired of pointing out that those things are not open if they aren't.
So one more question, Holger, before you hand over. OnCloud has done its newest product, Infinite Scale, at a completely open source and very radical open source approach. There is nothing closed source, nothing limited. There's just an EULA that limits hosters or something like, but the whole software is freely available to an extent completely. What was the decision to do that? Why did you trust in this model? And the second thing is, what can other companies, and that's also a question that I will ask Richard then, because you are the representatives of open source companies, of small, medium-sized companies, what can others learn from that, and what is the model for success with that? Why I mean, open washing is an evasion strategy. Yeah, and we have to show and tell a different model to compensate with that. So, what was your reasons for going that much open source with your newest product, for example?
Okay, yeah, when we redid OwnCloud in a cloud native way, etc., we were thinking, what do we do in regards of openness? And we decided to go into a mono repository on GitHub. We decided to even do our roadmap in the open and have as many discussions as we can have together with the community. I guess part of it because it got started by our customer community. CERN was one of the major original contributors to OwnCloud Infinite Scale, and we decided to not leave that path and clearly stay in the open there, continue to evolve it in that way, as said, including a roadmap, which is often a little tricky because you also see bugs and discussions and those type of things in the issues, with which for a commercial company can sometimes be tricky. However, till now we continue that down that path, and it serves us well. However, the system still needs to develop, and we've chosen an Apache license for it, so we could get rid of the community contributor agreement for it, which also was something people wanted. And that way, that's the path we're on right now. And if it's successful, we have yet to see. So everybody is, of course, welcome to look at that.
Richard, your product is also completely open source. You're in a market where there is one kind of monopolist who is closed source, and there is also, there's a variety of products. Not everybody is open source, but how can you justify being completely open and giving away most? Well, you have some add-ons that are not. You have some add-ons that would be considered open core, but how can you justify for your product that you're giving away the source code?
Yeah. So look, so every software has its history, right? So we come from MediaWiki. MediaWiki is the software of Wikipedia. So what we do is we take already a free software and reuse it, and we upstream again. And so we are very well connected to the community. And from this, it's only of course we need to be open source. There is no alternative to that. There is another thing which is, in my opinion, central. So today you cannot produce any software without using a piece of software which you haven't produced or is not maintained. So that is what some open source companies don't get today, is that, okay, yes, they want to be in the market, stay in the market, and want to grow. Of course, we'll talk about this a bit later. But it's also true that they are relying on software they don't provide, right? Even the big companies don't do this. So from this perspective, this is an approach that could be or should be fostered by the community to make this clear in a public view. But what I would say is, and now I'm come back to Cornelius saying this is a big threat. Yes, but we're not only living in a world of ideas, we're living in a world of capitalism. And if you ask what is interesting for a company, then of course, first of all, it's always profit, yes. And together with that, you need you need to stay in a market, and you want to reduce costs. Just take this. I don't justify it. That's how it is. And what makes any sort of free software and open source successful in our world is just, okay, you can reduce cost. You have any sort of benefit out of it. And many companies don't see the benefit. And for me, the benefit is clear. I don't see there is any alternative. And the notion that you need to have a product and you need to have the property is so deeply rooted in this capitalist system that is really hard to fight against. But if you look closer, then say we have no alternative in going in an open source, in a collaborative way of producing services and goods. That's where we have to go, and we need to be realistic in that. But I'm not sure if if other companies just look at their own costs. So they see just costs. Okay, if I maintain a community, if I do upstream, I have costs, but you get a lot of these things back. And it's a way to be in a market and stay in the market. And I think that's the point where we are now, because the public sector has changed now, and say, if you want to sell us something, you need to be open source. So in Switzerland, there is a law that they by accident that they now do open source first, and in Schleswig-Holstein again, and on a federal government level, we see the same, and that makes many companies now, they are worried because they don't have open source. They don't know how this works and how they can change it, or should they? And now they try to avoid everything. And I can understand this, but the question is, how can we help them to, or convince them this is a good way, and not only for single companies, but for the whole companies and whole economies and the society in sum.
Leonard, how can you and the Zendis help those companies like that? you're providing an open code repository for the public sector where they could, for example, upload their source code if it matches some conditions.
Yeah.
Are you like a gatekeeper for making sure that only true, real open source according to our values are in there, or how can I imagine that?
Yes, I think I would start with the question of the why. Why are we doing open source? Because I think to have a common understanding of why we are doing, what's the value for us, for society, is like one of the key factors we need to agree on in a way. So, and with Zendesk, we have this mission to work on digital sovereignty, and the government decided to found the Zendesk because there's a realization, especially in digital in the digital parts of society and how our government is running. We have really a strong addiction to and clustering on hyperscaler and specific vendors, which makes us unsovereign in a way. So we are not able to choose. So choosing between options is an indicator for sovereignty. So that's why we say, okay, if we need to have the possibility to switch. That's the first one. The second one is we want to influence those technologies. So if I have requirements from the public sector perspective, I want to have them in the software. I want to be able to address those within the process. So on the requirements side, we need to be able to work with the software and bring in our own features and things like that. And the third one is that we need to have the power to do so. That means like there's no licensing or whatever market saying, oh, you can't do that. And with public sector, if I take those three very central options, I would say, yeah, it's open source. That's the reason why we came to open source with the Zendesk. It wasn't open source in the first place. It's if you really think about digital sovereignty, open source is a solution for that. So I think that's the main value. If you want to have a democratic and sovereign society and society infrastructure, that's the entry door. So, and the second important thing is, what is open source? What does it mean? So how can we figure out? And that's the second thing we did with the platform Open Code for the public sector. We said, okay, what do we need to be clear about? So what are the definitions and rules of open source? With Open Code, we said, okay, we don't invent new rules. There are rules out there. Let's have a look and see how suitable they're for us. And we started and said, okay, we take the OSI layer and the OSI definition. That's our starting point. So, and we can build up our own open source definition on these OSI definitions and say, okay, this is the international rule. We do the same for the public sector. We describe it on the platform opencode.de. It's publicly visible. You can read in English and in German. And we describe it. What does it mean? Translating in German is also really important, because if you want to address public sector in Germany, you need to make these efforts understand, doing a common understanding of that. And then in the next step, it's about the licensing. Okay, we have a wide range of open source licensing out there. And if we have 11,000 public sector communes in Germany, and they all need to be experts in open source licensing, it will bring us nowhere. And we don't solve open source and digitalization anywhere. So what we did was a platform saying, okay, let's do that for the whole public sector. We already have we checked around 500 open source licenses and put them on an allow list and on a deny list, also publicly available on the platform, and say, okay, these are allowed and they stick to our rule of open source. So that's all the entry doors, where we said, okay, these are our policies, these are our rules, it's how we define it. We do it all public, it's open source. And now let's get a catalog and bring together all those projects fulfilling those rules. And now you said it, it's one thing is, well, I would say one thing is having research on public sector, and there's so much open source software in the public sector. In the last decades, it got developed a lot. So we just started collecting it on the platform, and we have now a Git repository where we get more and more of these repositories collected. But the second thing is like the end-to-end process. Maybe it's a lot important point, but if it comes to procurement and what are our rules, ensuring that we bring those software into platform and also into the market.
Yeah. At this point, I want to encourage everybody of you, ask questions, interrupt us, raise your hand and ask. And how do we do it with the microphone? Is there somebody with a microphone, or should I? Yeah. So we already have a question here. Just before, so the reason that you need a login for open code is also because the tennis or the you who run open code are meant to be like a gatekeeper for this.
Yes.
With the quality assurance of that there is, for example, not some marketing buzz project that is just pure open washing in there.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool.
The public sector needs someone who they can trust in, and they need to be from the sector. That's we are, and we say this platform is from the public. We are working for the public from the public sector, and we're doing the gatekeeping. Yes, that's right.
Eike.
So first of all, I think thank you for externalizing the frustration that I think many in the KDE community feel. Because if you look at the demographics of the KDE community, we are mainly comprised of developers. We don't have all that many people doing outreach or communication. So increasingly, when we attend an open source event and we introduce what we do, you run into people who are like, oh, you're writing code. What a curiosity. That's also open source. And for them, it's something very different. My question is the following. So I did not know the term open washing before. And of course, it immediately made me think of the similar term greenwashing that it's maybe inspired by.
That's where it comes from.
Yeah. And I live in Berlin, which is full of companies that offer SaaS software for carbon footprint monitoring. And of course, they also sell you an eco-label where you're green just for doing footprint monitoring. And of course, you have carbon offsets that don't always promise what they actually do. And I think if I look at the arc of the public reaction to these things, then at this point, the term greenwashing is well established. And I think particularly consumers have turned to cynicism, right? They hear something is green or they have that checkbox, offset your flight. And at this point, everybody knows it's not holding its promises. And so people react with cynicism to the green language, let's say. Can we still avoid this for the term open source, and how? That people will just make that leap to, well, it's open source. I don't trust that. It's probably trying to sell me onto something that isn't quite true. Are we there yet? How close are we to that cliff? And can we still turn away from it?
Cornelius, you moved, so I guess you would like to answer.
Yeah, I have an opinion about that. I think if we are talking about software, the term open source is well defined. We have the OSI definition, we have a list of licenses, and I think we have more or less clarity. And if a company tries to sell a license as open source license, which is actually not open source, they get heavy pushback. And so far, companies have not been successful with, at least not on the level that really licenses would publicly get accepted. I mean, maybe in terms of marketing terms and having this open impression. But that's still, I think we still have a chance there. I would say we have to be very careful there. We have to fight that. Attempts to open wash the term. We have to support the OSI in keeping up the standard definition. I think that's very important. What actually concerns me is that I think we were talking about AI, that in this area, I think the ship has sailed. On the Llama webpage, it says this is the open source AI model from and whatever. And then you read the license and you see, okay, there's all these things, there are these additional restrictions, there's this, and the term open source AI, everybody talks about that. There's a lot of companies which are publishing open source AI. And if you read the licenses, that in many cases, they have these restrictions where it's not open anymore. In the sense of in the sense of what you would apply for open source software. Of course, the situation is more complicated because there are models, there is training data, there is software around that, and that's why I also appreciate the efforts of the OSI or the Linux Foundation and all that to find a better definition there. But I wouldn't be too confident that with this massive money which is flowing into that and all these commercial activities and a lot of really high stakes which are there, that we as open source software community, which are not even very much close to this AI community because they are coming from a different angle, that there it's really hard to save this. So I think we have to be careful there. We have to make sure that it works for open source software, and I think we have to find a way how. We had this nice positive vision on the slides before, in the keynote before, how this nice positive vision, what we can do in terms of activisms, in terms of communication to preserve this the spirit of open source there, maybe with other words, but I don't think open source AI will ever work for us in a favorable way as a term.
I have to disagree in a positive way, yeah? Because I think it's essential that for those terms, we also make sure that in the world of AI, it follows our understanding, and we have to have a positive push on it. I don't think the world is over there, and the rule or the solution, I think, is competition. If you look into newer models like from Mistral together with NVIDIA, they are publishing it now under an Apache license. And what we're missing now is the data, and with the training data for full transparency, etc. There are lots of copyright issues. I think that's a matter of time that we find rules for that. There were great ideas in the talk before that about how that can accomplish, but I think we have to be positive. We don't allow people to steal the term open source for their BSL or SSPL or whatever licenses. We have, as a community, to make sure it doesn't happen in AI either, which more and more will be part of every every software solution out there.
Hand over the microphone. I have a question to Richard and then Leon. I think, Holger, that we have to separate between, we only have some few minutes left, by the way. We have to separate between the general AI, the Gen AI topic, and the small AI topic, which is like the autocorrect on steroids, I like to call it. Yeah, that's like tools that, for example, that's why I want Richard to say something about that. That's what I know, that also cities, like the city of Treuchtlingen, they're using tools like that to do summaries of meetings of the board of the city, the mayor's board, whatever. So there is what I call small AI tools, yeah, and they are present everywhere. They're also in your tools, and they are open source as far as I understand. And with these tools, they can be completely open source. Am I right?
Yeah, it's always the same story. So we are not providing LLMs because that's too much for us. So you can connect to different LLMs, but it's sometimes a bit ridiculous if you have a sponsor in the public sector which is saying, "Hey, we want to use open source, we want to try it out," and then the provider on the other hand says, "Oh, but ChatGPT is far ahead." As you see, that's like Google Analytics and Matomo. If you don't foster and use Matomo, then Matomo will take much longer to keep up. And that is what I see here coming again, because it's easier to use ChatGPT and an OpenAI and stuff like that, which is heavily financed with venture capital, and we will see what will be the result. But I'm a bit pessimistic in that way.
So,
thank
you. Yeah, maybe I close again with a more optimistic perspective on that, because I would say if our mission was to bring open source in right in the heart of how we define society, we are winning. That's what I would say.
Yes.
And if we was then, as we had the opportunity, you said it in the beginning, to be in New York at the OSS for Good conference, which the second year, it's just the second one, and 700 people from all over the world came there and discussing those things. And what we're doing right now with policies, and what Switzerland is doing, and France is doing, and Germany is doing with policies, but especially not only from the government side, really like doing creating real code. What we're doing right now from government perspective, we're creating code. We will launch Open Desk in October for public sector in Germany, which means we really are on a point where I would say we're winning with open source. And this recognition brings also, we need to discuss again and again, what are the rules for open source? Why are we doing it? And so that's my more optimistic point on that, because there's a really good why we're doing it.
That's a wonderful closing statement. I wish we had 2 or 3 or more hours to discuss this. I can, if you want to know more about open code and about the Zendis and about the United Nations story, go to golem.de. That's where the article is that I wrote. It's got some 100,000 readers. We were totally surprised, but it's really something where, believe it or not, Germany is leading in the open source world in digitalization of the public sector. No, you don't believe that. That can't be. No. But thanks a lot. And I'm sorry we didn't have more time. Thanks a lot to all 4 of us. Thanks. And we try to make a panel or a talk or a whole room at FOSS next year about the topic of open washing. So feel free to contact me, us, whoever, if you want to be in there. And thanks. Thank you.